let's talk about looking back to 2021. And I wanted to get your thoughts for this episode on what you thought the top 10 big stories were that occupied your mind. I guess it's all colored by COVID, which is either an accelerant or a creator of things. But overview, when you look back at 2021, if you and I were on an elevator heading up to somewhere and you only had a minute or two to describe 2021, what would you say?
In a nutshell, from food inflation to TimBiebs to supply chain woes to the Suez Canal and even Danny DeVito and Nabisco, that would sum up 2021 for me. What about you? You saw my list, and we'll probably go through it, but I certainly would want your opinion on the list that I prepared for you.
Well, I think you nailed a lot of the things that, if I was to boil it down to three, it's the acceleration of trends because of COVID. It is the creation, and that's all kind of things. That is, TimBiebs is not. That's a very fun story. It actually, but it actually captures the revitalization of Tim Hortons brand. So I think they're doing a much better job as a brand. With their place in, I think they lost the script a little bit for a few years, and they lost their place in the hearts and minds of Canadians. And I thought it was genius and well executed, and apparently they're good. So I think that was nice. I think what was different about 2021 clearly was COVID, whether it's the supply chain dramas, whether it's food insecurity, a little bit of, taking it less for granted, as you said. So I think, in my mind, then the industry stuff, the really how we think about how the relations between brands and retailers works. Yeah. And, it's not like there wasn't stress or opportunity pre-COVID, but obviously COVID put a lot of stress. On the one hand, put a lot of stress. And on the other hand, the demand shot up, right? 2021 was the cementing of volumes. And Michael Medline said this, I think, in his release about his numbers. He said, we're thinking that even though food service is open, there's a lot of Canadians who are now cooking more at home. And that, I always try to sift through temporary changes that are just adjustments to unusual circumstances versus structural changes. I think a structural change is more work from home, but more work from home has an incredible impact on the food service industry. I mean, the breakfast hour and the lunch hour.
Oh, absolutely. That's why I've always looked at that metric very closely, because I think even early on in the pandemic, I remember being on a few panels and people were saying, oh, we're going to go back to how things were. No problem. People will be working in their offices. I mean, we're almost 2 years into this pandemic, and you can see already that the marketplace won't look the same. It won't look the same. People will be working in different places.
And I guess, actually, I just came off an interview myself on the other side of the mic with Susan Kransky from the Globe and Mail talking about, these kind of things on retail. And I said, listen, there's a lot of people, and it applies to restaurants and food service. Can I still make money on 66% of the crowd? So, if you rely on commuters, office workers, and maybe some tourists, can you still, and there's a school of thought that says when people go back, that they'll take those special days and actually go do all that stuff. Like, I'm only in the office 1 or 2 days a week. I'm going to shop and I'm going to go out for lunch with my friends. I think that's a very sound bet. The question is, for all the restaurateurs listening, can you keep your business afloat on 2 or 3 days, maybe 4 days of good volume, and then nothing on the other days? Don't know. We don't know, right? We're going to have
absolutely. To see. There's still a lot of things that are in flux, obviously, because we're still not done here, but you can start slowly seeing what the picture will look like on the other side of the pandemic, for sure. Yeah. Well, and I would say that 2021 was really, yes, COVID painted a lot of the things that we're seeing or we saw, but the word that when I actually started to prepare the list for this show, the word that came up a lot in my mind, especially from a supply chain and labor perspective, is fatigue. I mean, the food industry, we have to remember, Michael, the food industry has delivered, executed, has made Canada food secure for 21 months now, despite uh, Mother Nature,
Formidable challenge.
floods,
Formidable
yeah,
challenge. Yeah.
pandemics, problems with supply chains. I mean, there's been a lot of issues, and still shelves are full. People have something to eat.
Yeah.
We haven't had major challenges as we saw in other parts of the world. We have to really celebrate what the food industry has done over the last 20 months. It's been a miracle, really.
Yeah, it's a great point because from the supply chain going sideways in the Suez Canal, which is your
Yes.
which is number 10. I mean that raised just this awareness that
Did you remember
these
that the Suez Canal issue was actually in 2021? Because it only happened
I
in March, which is a
you know
century ago now.
which is a lot. But did you know that that boat only got released in September, right? Like
Yes, that's
they
right.
and that's happening actually on the coast, on the west coast. So that boat that caught on fire with all those containers, and I talked to retailers, their stuff's on the bottom of the ocean. They're like, we're not getting that for Christmas. 110 containers fell off and are gone.
Was it
Um,
110? Oh my God. Wow.
110. And I talked random sampling. 3 retailers told me they had product on those containers, and they're not getting that back. But the whole boat is still stuck. It's stuck in an insurance process.
Oh
So
yeah.
nothing has
Yeah,
moved from that
the Suez
ship.
Canal obstruction lasted 6 days, but the investigation, everything else, lasted months and months and
Months,
months. And
months,
I mean, the
months.
costs, according to some experts, was $400 million an hour or something,
Yeah,
while the ship was obstructing the
yeah.
canal. So it's just unbelievable. I think it really got people to think that global supply chains are fragile, and you only
Hmm.
need one obstruction to really create havoc, create some major issues.
Well, and I think I bet it's got many retailers and many brands rethinking their supply chain philosophies, because
Yep.
how do you make a supply chain more agile versus more buttoned down and cost effective? Because sometimes those two things don't match. Now, a big boat getting stuck in the Suez Canal or a boat catching on fire. I mean, these things are going to happen. That's not a COVID issue, really.
Yep.
Um, you know, those things happen. Amazingly, those things happen all the time. But it just raised everyone's awareness
Oh
of
yeah.
how I remember the early days of COVID. I was on radio explaining supply chain. People are like, what is supply chain that you're talking about? How does this even like doesn't stuff just show
Stuff
up on the shelf?
appear magically in stores, Michael. Come on.
I mean, the average Canadian doesn't care to know,
But I
really.
remember there were some criticism about just in time procurement, and I'm a big believer in JIT. To be honest, I've never questioned the model. And frankly, I think grocers know how to operate in Canada. So I never actually questioned their approach. The empty shelves was a moment in time. I mean,
Yeah.
basically, you saw one sector shutting down, and seeing another sector absorbing that shock for a while, and that's
Yeah.
it. I think people have moved on there.